Hi everyone, I am clearly already joined by my first, by my little co-host. Hi everyone and welcome to my podcast Karoline's Knits. My name is Karoline and I live in Scotland with my partner Ben and my puppy Fayla. I am originally Danish. I started knitting in May 2020, so knitting was basically my lockdown hobby. Fayla joined us for the first time last time and she's about to drink my tea, and I am not too convinced that she will be as nice as she was last time. I am filming in the late afternoon instead of the morning, and I sort of had to chase her in from the garden. She's been digging extra today, so she might not be as sweet as she was from my last episode. First off, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who left lovely comments, and you know, it was kind of like ripping off a band-aid. I kind of just needed to film that first podcast to come back, and I know Laura from Penrose Knits has talked about it, but when you finish filming, often you sit and you're like, did I actually speak about anything of interest to anyone in that time? But yeah, I had, I guess people still enjoyed it and many was happy to see me back. So today it's actually been less than a week since my last podcast. So I will talk you through the sort of 2 ongoing projects that I worked on in the past week. And then earlier this week, I'm slowly but surely catching up with all the podcasts that I missed while I was dealing with the puppy, who she's currently lying on the buffet that she has claimed as hers most of the time. So if you hear some chewing noises and going backwards and forwards and little paws click-clacking on the floor, it's just her. But yes, I saw Penrose Knits, or Laura had done a really lovely Q&A episode, and I thought that might be a way to sort of come back earlier and have something to film. My partner is away this weekend and Pup and I are therefore alone, and I'd been so excited to film. I had deliberately waited until today is Sunday, to film. I was like, it's going to be great, you know, Pup and I will just get up in the morning and have a good wee snuggle. And then last time I filmed in the morning and she was just really good, so I was like, that's definitely when I'll do it and it'll just be great. She sleeps through most nights, but last night was one of the nights she didn't, so I was up at 3, and then it was just one of those nights where once I'd kind of resettled her and got her back to bed, I just couldn't nod off as well again. And yeah, I was just so tired this morning that the thought of getting up and filming was just not happening. I took her for a walk, and when we came back, because she was bouncing off the walls this morning. Most mornings, as you might be able to see on my Instagram, she's actually quite calm and quite snuggly. This morning, however, she woke up and I was just, yeah, she was bored. And then when we came back from the walk, it took her a while to settle. And then I was planning to watch the F1 and then I just zonked. I think I've slept for over 2 hours. So when I finally woke up, I was feeling really groggy. And it was one of those, I was like, oh, I could also just film tomorrow. But I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna, I had deliberately washed and blow dried my hair so it looked nice for today, and I was like, you know what, it won't take that long to film, and then it's all done. So here we are. Pup has joined me again, which is lovely. For anyone who missed my last episode, Fayla is my Border Collie Labrador puppy. She is now basically 16 weeks. So she's getting quite big. Fayla! Oh, that's Jan. Fayla. At least she didn't completely pull it apart. I'll take that. I am really quickly going to show you the progress of my sweater number 1 while she's chewing the treat I traded her for. What's that you found? Oh, is it a little bone? That looks nice. Fayla. Oh, and that's... She loves paper too. At least that was just a belly band. I could have survived had that gone missing. So my sweater number 1 is knitted in 2 strands. My hair, designer favourite things, knitwear. And last time I hadn't split for sleeves yet, which I have managed. And I am currently knitting the body ribbing. Because I was so all over the place last time, I didn't speak very much about different projects. I think I very shortly mentioned that I found it a bit daunting to do a project in full mohair, simply because mohair is, or silk mohair I should say, simply because silk mohair is quite a hard fibre to work with at times. So silk mohair is obviously very, very fluffy, and that's really why people use it. But it's also extremely sticky to itself, meaning you can't frog it. I find that tension can be a bit funny in it, like it somehow is really stretchy but isn't at the same time. And yeah, so I actually have another project I planned ages ago in pure mohair in just 1 strand, and I remember I bought the yarn for it thinking, oh, I'm just gonna do that project, and I swatched for it and I was like, God, this is way too hard. So I think that really put me off actually finally using the yarn. And sweater number 1 is not a difficult pattern construction wise, but I will just be completely honest and say I do not enjoy working in purely mohair. I find it just unpleasant to knit with. So yeah, I think it's worth sort of keeping in mind that I don't think, while the pattern isn't difficult, you know, it's a completely straight up and down raglan. There's no short rows. You don't have to do Italian tabula cast on if you don't want to. So if you didn't do that, it's basically a full-on beginner pattern. But I do think my hair is hard, and I would not recommend it as like a fast pattern. Come on, come on. I know, am I not giving you all my attention? Am I not giving you all my attention? It is a tough life being a puppy with a mum that is so into her knitting that you get ignored. The sort of, it's quite fast because I swatched for it originally on 6mm as recommended by the pattern. I think it's 14 stitches, but again, my hair's funny because it's so stretchy. I decided just to go up a needle size because I think I was off by 2 or 3 stitches. But then I was like, well, I'll go up a needle size. That'll probably give me at least one or two stitches more. And then if it still is a bit tight over the bust, I can always block it a bit aggressively. I still, now that I've been knitting it, I just feel like the yoke looks really big. But it is quite oversized. So yeah, I'm sort of hoping for the best. I love the colour, and obviously the amazing thing about my hair is that it is as light as it comes, right? Like I've used basically no yarn, which is another reason sweater number 1 is a good one to have in your arsenal, because if you do have even my size, I think based on the positive ease, I think I should have done the 2XL, but I'm just knitting the XL, or basically I should have done the bigger size, but I'm doing the second biggest size just because, as I've spoken about before, I tend to like a tiny bit less positive ease. But still, I think you're looking at, for the bigger size, 175 grams of mohair, and for the second size, or second biggest size, you're looking at 150 grams of mohair, which actually isn't that much mohair. It's not as little as Knit Flitter's Day Off sweater, which I've spoken, Day Off blouse it's called, which is 1 strand. But if you want something kind of quick and you want to stash, you know, if you have some rogue mohair, it's a really good project. So I started knitting on that, and it's been quite nice because it's been a really straightforward knit. Do we really need a squeaker? Do we really lie down? Yes, lie down. So as we were home alone, I mentioned before that I really wanted to knit through most of my stash, and oh, what's wrong? Is it because you can't be outside digging up the garden? Okay, that is tough. as I was saying, so as we were home alone, Pop and I decided I could justify a new project. I've actually had a lot more knitting time the past week. Like I probably knit it much more like I used to in the past week, just because I really found my mojo and I was just really excited. So obviously I'm trying mainly to knit from stash, and in my stash I had Phil Kalana's Peruvian Highland Wool. And after having seen the whole how do you pronounce things in Danish, I wouldn't actually call it Phil Kalana in Danish, I'd call it Fylkulana, but it just doesn't really work with my English accent. So I had, I might take some pictures of that, of the yarn that I'm about to show, because Pup is not happy. How about I find you a chew and then send you outside? Right, I've sent Pup outside for a little while with a chew. Let's see how she does that. Because I could tell she was about to bite the balloon sleeves. I think she found these beautiful sleeves too interesting, which I've not mentioned what I'm wearing today actually. This is my recently finished Fern Sweater. The pattern is Knitting for Olive, and I have spoken about it in the last podcast and a lot of other podcasts. So as I was saying, I have some Phil Kalana or Fylkulana Peruvian Highland Wool in my stash in the colour Marzipan. This colour is one of those colours that were made extremely crazily popular by especially Petite Knit. Marzipan is just a really lovely beige that actually I think, I don't think I've seen anyone in Marzipan where it didn't suit them. Obviously being a natural blonde, I always think sort of browns and beiges are a bit hard because they can clash a little bit. So I had 12 balls of this in my stash, 600 grams, and I just have not really, when I bought it, I essentially bought it because I bought it from Knitt, I should say, and I essentially bought it because she had it in stock, and I was just so nervous that she'd run out of stock. It was pure stockpiling. I didn't order my hair with it, and I just had absolutely no plan for it whatsoever. And then she showed me a pattern that she's working on, which is so Phil Kalana every year releases loads of patterns for free, or not loads of patterns, but like they have, you know, collections for each season, and they are completely free. They are also translated into English. So if you think this looks nice, there's, you know, they're all there. And there's quite a few. They also have children's patterns, and I think they're quite well written, despite being obviously like a brand. It still has like good descriptions and all of that from the patterns I've looked at. So obviously it's an amazing resource. And so the design I'm about to talk about is from Henny Raymond, but they also have like, I know Pubnit does designs for them. Someone called Gula on Instagram, and yeah, they have loads of really good designs. So Simona from Knitt showed me that she was working on one of the colour work sweaters that Hannah Raymond had designed for them in the recent one, which is called Nordstrand. And I thought Nordstrand just looked so good. I really like, so Hannah Raymond did the Holly sweater or Christian sweater, which got made really famous by Karoline and Matilda on Instagram last year. And Hannah Raymond does a lot of classic sort of colour yoke designs. She has a lot of really lovely and beautiful designs. And one day I'd like to knit the Holly sweater. I have some of the recommended yarn, which is Snifnook from Camarose, upstairs in my stash, some leftovers. So I think that's certainly on my list for the future. But anyway, when I saw she'd made that, I thought this is a chance to use up the Peruvian Highland Wool. Marzipan is obviously, again, the perfect base colour. You can essentially pair any secondary colour to it if you really wanted to. So it has a roll neck. Oh my god, I thought all the stitches had fallen off. They hadn't. It has a roll neck, so I've spent all weekend thinking I was going to do my first colour work by knitting this, because it just takes, for some reason the ribbing has just taken an extra long time. I think it's because I've been stuck on ribbing on this as well, and yeah, it's a bit soul destroying. Papa's eating her chew outside. I think she would much rather lie outside in the grass than be forced to look cute for the podcast. So essentially I had enough of this, but I obviously needed the contrast colour for the yoke and also a second strand. So in the pattern she recommends Filcolina's Tilia, which is their mohair. I have another sweater that I used Tilia for, which I showed actually probably in my first podcast, because in December it will have been a year, I think. Was that when I first released? Maybe it was December. And I found Tilia a tiny bit scratchy. Now, I am, as you can probably tell already by what I say about sweater number one, you know, I don't really buy mohair anymore, and I'm not the biggest fan of it, so I'm not really surprised I'm not that keen on it. So for my second strand, I decided to go with a new quality from Fricolina called Alva. Alva is 100% alpaca, and it runs 175 grams per 25 centimeters. I don't think it says anything about it's like gauged. And I think they released this to be a mohair alternative. To me, this reminds me of Isaiah's alpaca one, which is also like this. It's like it is still like a chain net sort of spun, similar actually to the Peruvian Highland wool, which is 100% new wool, and this runs 100 meters per 50 grams, and they're sort of spun quite similarly actually. I don't know if you can tell, maybe if I hold these two up together, like the fuss levels are very different. Like I don't think the Filcolina Alva has like the same amount of halo as mohair. However, having worked on a project in a single strand of Peruvian Highland wool, I do think this feels softer. For me, I would be surprised if Peruvian Highland wool isn't next to skin soft. It isn't that kind of rustic. I think it's very well spun, and it's certainly not soft like some yarns, but I think you'd have to be extremely sensitive not to be able to have this next to skin. I would even go so far as to buy this and knit for children in it. That's how. So, you know, while it's not soft, I do think most people would get on with it, but I do find that now knitting it up with Alva, it does give like a tiny bit more softness. It obviously is a bit thicker than mohair, so you'll need more Alva, but then you know, a lot of the mohair has gone up in price. So Tilia used to be about £5.50 or £6 on Knit, and because of price increases from the supplier, it's now £7, and that's a significant chunk of money for a second strand. You know, obviously this Fern Sweater has mohair in it, and while the halo is beautiful, I do think it's a lot of money for what is essentially just something that gives a bit of halo and fluff to it. So yeah, so I went for this combo, and yeah, so far the roll neck feels really lovely and squishy. Northstarn is my first proper colour work project, and I've decided just to kind of go for it on the yoke. So I think I'm going to go up a needle size, as I'm clearly still a tiny bit away from starting the colour work chart. I am just going to, you know, if anyone has any good advice, just let me know. I am a continental knitter, so I am slightly nervous how I'm going to manage to have two strands on one hand, but I guess we'll see. I also did the Italian tubular cast on. My contrast colour is, I should also mention that the first ball of Alva was gifted by Simona. Now she's digging in the garden. Was gifted by Simona originally, and then I ordered this other yarn that I needed to supplement with my own money, but then she refunded me as a gift and as a welcome back, so technically gifted, but I had already bought it. Both Peruvian Highland wool and Alva together actually, I would say, are both on the more affordable ends of the scale. So I will show you these, and then I'll pull Pup in from Ruining the Garden. So I've got, this is the colour Merlot. Yeah, so this is the colour Merlot, called colour code 804. in Peruvian Highland wool. And then we have in Alva, they didn't, these colours, there wasn't like a matching colour, so this is marzipan as well. So I went for Bordeaux, which is colour code 245, and together it is just like really beautiful, like dark red. The Merlot is one of the melange, which is marzipan is as well, which means it isn't pure one colour, for example, in contrast to this. So this has like kind of like a mix of like true red and a bit of purple in it. Really, really lovely. So yes, that's going to be the contrast colour on the yoke, and wish me luck, guys. I'm really excited to start something new. Right, I'm pulling pup in just a second. Oh, that's great. Muddy paws all over my sofa. Just what I wanted, my pup. Yes, so Laura in one of her episodes talked about like sort of losing your mojo, and obviously I talked about last time how I did it a little bit with her and how it's returned, and I think, as she said, podcasting completely just like makes me so excited and makes it so much easier for me to sort of be excited about new projects and be excited to show things. So I've spoken for much longer than I was kind of anticipating, but on my iPad I did make a note of the questions asked on Instagram. So I thought in this sort of final part I could talk about that. So thank you to people who ask me questions. You're always welcome to leave questions down in the comments below. I do try my best to get back, but sometimes there's repeating things. So one thing I've been asked quite a few times is to create episodes that are more for beginners, and to talk about how I substitute yarn and how to find patterns, etc. So I've actually thought about doing it for Nordstrand, because obviously I've replaced it with Alva. The pattern is free, so there's less sort of worries with copyright and intellectual property of those things. So anywho, if you have requests or questions, basically leave them down below. And now I'll move on to the Q&A part. So the first one is, what is your knitting related guilty pleasure? I actually really like Italian bind-offs. I quite enjoy that process of sort of knitting all of that. I also love like when you finished a project and you look at all the belly bands of all the yarn you knit it through and marking it complete on Ravelry, like that kind of like, yes, look how much yarn I've gone through. I really like that. Someone asked, how do you gauge whether a design will look good on? That's a really good question. First of all, I think I tend to pick similar things. So certain designs I just, certain design elements I know usually suits me. So I usually find that like this one, like sort of yoke designs with the slight balloon sleeves, a good tight ribbing down on my wrist is slimming. I find that's quite flattering. I have seen that some designers are moving very much towards it's moving very much towards sort of oversized, it's sort of moving towards very oversized and like, drop shoulders and all of that. And besides, obviously I have my Wednesday sweater that's that kind of fit, and I still don't think it's the most, it's not unflattering, but it's certainly not a flashing necessarily fit on my body frame. So yeah, I would say there's some design elements that I just tend to know will work. Second of all, I absolutely love Instagram. I do think being able to see the designs on other people make a big difference, and is often why I knit designs by Fayla. Can you stop being a troll and play right where the tripod is, maybe? And I do find, if you knit from big designers, chances are that there's more, there's more people who has uploaded pictures of it. And because there's so many of the Scandinavian designers that have such big followings, obviously, as that's the main sort of group of designers I knit from, then I just find it's much easier to see. I feel a bit nervous, for example, some of the Phil Kalana patterns, for example, doesn't have that many people showing them. and as many good photos, and then I find it really hard to know. And then I just know that deep down I'm always more likely to pick a pattern that I've seen on quite a few people. I do follow deliberately, especially testers for the big designers that knit, you know, that often test knit for them, and also ones that often test knit in the size that I would knit, just because I then find I see the designs as they're coming out. Often for the big designers, you know, it's very active profiles. She's giving me this look of, what is this crazy human doing? Yes, I often follow testers in that size. Also because when you get sponsored yarn, that's at least what I have always found, is that if someone pays me or has paid for my yarn, I feel more obligated to post more progress photos and post, you know, loads of photos with it on, and give it maybe a slightly different type of attention to say, you know, thank you to both the designer and the brand who kindly sponsored my yarn. I also think that for me to get the knitting mojo back, that's why not testing for a little while has actually been really lovely. I think I got really burnt out constantly having a pattern to do. Okay, I'm picking out for you. So yes, I do think that is a way I gauge. And the final thing, the sort of third thing, is I also really recommend that you critically think about how much positive ease you truly like in your patterns. As I said, as many designers are moving more oversized, and as many designers are, you know, for example, different body shape and a smaller size than me, I find that when they say, you know, 20 centimeters of positive ease on them might look quite nice, I find that on me, you know, 20 centimeters of positive ease would, you know, obviously be where I'm the widest around my chest, and it's not a good look on me. I completely lose all shape in it. And in general, I'm happier with the knit when I go down a size. I always pick a size that is based on what they recommend, and then I usually go a size down. Next question, what are some things you do now as a more experienced knitter that you didn't before? First of all, obviously doing the Italian cast on and bind off are two major things, and being able to sort of gauge that pressure. In general, I think I am much less scared by new techniques, and I have a much easier time learning new techniques, and I have a much easier time keeping track of many things at once. A good example is, for example, when I started knitting, when I test knitted the office sweater, you know, you're doing increases. I'm so sorry if anyone relates to drinking sounds. That's not me, that's the pub. You know, you're doing increases in different frequencies to the front and the shoulder side, and you're doing short rows while you're doing the increases. You know, that's a lot of things to keep track of. And now I don't really struggle. I think I've just accepted that, for example, stitch markers are your best friend. The less you have to count, the better. So that's why I talk about how much I use them, because when I first started knitting, I don't think I was good enough at actually just using stitch markers to sort of mark my progress. And finally, I also think the thing you become better as you get more experienced is being willing to fix mistakes, and maybe also knowing how to. Right, the next question is your favorite knitted item, yarn and project. So for favorites, I would always say that my favorite project is always what I have just finished. I think it's because I always enjoyed whatever's new. I always feel really proud of like having accomplished that. I don't think there's anything under this sofa, Fayla. No need to dig through. You're not gonna find anything exciting. Always sort of the latest thing I've made. I would say that my two absolute favourite yarns is Karoline Snifflook, which is an Aran Way blow yarn, which is very, very soft. Haven't knitted in that for a long time because it's really expensive. And I don't have any stashed anymore. And secondly, it is Siri alpaca, like baby Siri alpaca with silk. So basically the way have replacement I prefer. Fayla, my love, don't play with the tripod. Good girl. My favourite project, I obviously this year I have really discovered lace knitting, and I would say that my favourite projects have actually been the Lena Holm Samso ones with lace. I actually quite enjoyed this, and even towards the end of the body, I didn't really grow too tired of the repeated lace pattern, so they're probably my favourite projects. Any tips? Oh, so the next question is, any tips for a new knitter trying to move on from knitting kits, choosing yarn, etc.? I started out with kits as well. My first sweater was a kit from Wool and Again, and then since then I've done 2 other of their kits. I can totally see the appeal in them, which is why I picked them at the time. And I also found moving away from having the pattern and the right amount of yarn and being told what needle size you need, which obviously you that isn't a given because you should really test your gauge, but that's completely another point. Found that really appealing. The way I moved away from it was, so the first sort of pattern I did where I bought my own yarn was the Petite Knit Sunday sweater, and as far as I remember I bought the recommended yarn for that was on the list, which I do think is a good place to start. You know, pick a design lots of people have done. You know, certain designers like Petite Knit, her earlier patterns are, you know, have been knitted by so incredibly many people that they're much easier to read, and you can have a good sort of idea of how hard it's going to be. And then I would go with recommended yarn, or at least very close to. So this is again something I learned with time, that through Instagram I kind of looked for what did other people knit, you know, sweaters in, that I, you know, if there's a sweater I really wanted to knit, I would look on Instagram on the hashtag, and then I would see what yarn people have. Ow! Fayla! That was my phone! Oh, that hurt. And I used to use collections loads, and you basically use that to keep track of, well, maybe for the Sunday sweater you could use Drops Air instead, or you could use Drops Kid Silk, or you know, maybe there's a slightly thicker alternative that you could use single strand that someone has done. And I saved that in collections, especially because when I first sort of moved away I found all the patterns really overwhelming. Now that I have a general list, I generally just save, and then my saved folder on my Instagram I just scroll through every once in a while for inspiration. But back then I used to save it into deliberate folders for projects that I was looking into, and I would also save projects deliberately based on you know, the yarn or the colour. And over time I also think you get better at knowing what yarns are sort of interchangeable. So most of my hairs are basically fully interchangeable. That doesn't mean you get the same quality, but it means that, you know, the gauge is sort of similar. Sort of things in the, you know, sort of like Peruvian Highland wool is a yarn that can be replaced by lots of things, like Double Sunday from Sandnes, or Peer Gund, or which is also from Sandnes. Like those kind of wools are kind of similar thickness. And then for the sort of like thinner merinos, you know, knitting for Olive's merino can be replaced quite easily by Lanagatto VIP sold from Knitt, or Sunday from Sandnes, and lots of these things. And you kind of start to sort of see that category of yarn that everyone seems to just do interchangeably, and I found that really helped. But yes, I would also go with a pattern that is paid for, or at least a pattern with enough details. So if you've ever looked at Drops, while they have lots of patterns, they're very high level, and I think it would be way too hard to start with. And I would also say, if there's a pattern you know someone who has done a knit along on, where they sort of talk you through different techniques, that's really helpful. For any Danes out there, that's what I did with the Sunday sweater. Someone called Skateboard Girl on Instagram did that, and in case you can hear the puppy whining, it's because she's upset she's not allowed to dig in the garden, but she will be allowed to in just a second. Am I gonna have to take you outside again? Are you not done? Are you not done? Okay. But yes, so when I say paid for, I just mean, you know, don't go for like a really free basic one. I learned to knit from what was called Craftsy, and that was also quite helpful because it talked through how to read a pattern. But if you've already done a kit, you can already read a pattern, so I wouldn't be too worried about that. Watch me spill tea all over myself. Someone asked, are you going to make Fayla a matching sweater? I don't actually think I'll ever knit her anything. Because of the type of fur, so Fayla's fur being a lab collie mix, obviously it's not, you know, collies, lots of collies, or at least her dad was not long haired but slightly longer double coated, whereas her mum was lab and had a lab coat. And I actually find that Fayla's fur dries and cleans itself really well, and she isn't cold. Quite the contrary, I think she finds being inside really hot, and that's why she much prefers to be out in the garden compared to being stuck in here. So I don't think I'll knit her a sweater just because she doesn't have much need for it. She, quite the contrary, if she wore one inside, she'd be too hot, and if she wore one on walks, it would get wet and soggy. And Fayla's own fur actually dries incredibly fast. So I did, Fabi Knits did suggest me I could knit her like a bandana in time, which I might, but currently, as you might be able to tell, she is way too destructive to have anything made for her, but maybe in the future. Knitting dreams and goals. So my big knitting dream, obviously I'm about to start this colourwork sweater, which I'm quite excited about. I would also really like to at some point actually do a pair of socks. I have probably said to Laura from Penrose Knits that I'm going to knit a pair of socks about 100 times now, and I've still not knit any. I just find the thin yarn, and just find socks a little bit intimidating, and also I haven't yet really, like, I quite like the pattern socks. Well, that's a bunny dog. We also look out onto a path where dogs walk all the time, and Fayla saw the dog too. I think that's a collie as well. And yeah, so I really do want to at some point knit socks. I love the look of lace socks. I love the idea that you could have a project that is quite small and doesn't require, you know, 2 sleeves as well. For knitting dreams, so one thing I actually really liked, and I had kind of forgotten how it felt, was obviously for the Nordstrand, while I had some of the yarn in my stash, it's buying yarn and immediately casting it on. And I think that's a big goal of mine, is to sort of get back to that point where I think about what I have in my stash, and I do have sweater quantities of lots of different yarns, and most of them I could basically cast on immediately, but obviously didn't. And I think I think it's easy to kind of forget some of that joy when you buy, you know, yarn for a project and then don't make it immediately, but just let it just kind of lie and wait. Yeah, I think it's a big shame that all that excitement you felt, you know, finding the right yarn and picking the colour, waiting for it to come in, you know, squishing it for the first time, and then you just leave it in your stash for ages and don't knit it. And I really want to get away from that. I really want to get away from, you know, if I order something in to supplement what I have in my stash, or I have a project I really want to knit, I want to get better at just knitting it. That's also why I think I'm going to have to force myself to cool down on test knitting. As much as it's lovely having yarn sponsored, and test knitting is really good fun and I really recommend it for anyone, I also think it's really easy to get a tiny bit burnt out with all the pressure of, are you knitting it within the deadline, and is your gauge spot on, what if it isn't, and having to restart if it isn't, and the fit and all of these things. So yeah, I'm kind of just looking forward to a period of falling in love with my stash again. I have such a beautiful stash. If you watched for a while, you might have seen just how much yarn I have. Last time I calculated, because it's all on Ravelry, I think that's available to everyone to see. Last time I checked, I think it was 15 or 20 kilos easily of yarn, and that means I have easily 20 full sweater quantity projects up there. So I just kind of need to actually finally knit through it and use it all, so it doesn't go to waste. Which was, none of this was very concrete, but I think it's because I'm very much gonna be, I think I've basically told myself just to do, you know, start one project at a time. I'm becoming more and more monogamous in my knitting. I kind of feel like I start out really monogamous, as I think most knitters do. Then all of a sudden, I often had several cast-ons and kind of had to knit a bit on everything, and then a test knit would come in and projects would have to wait. But after getting Fayla, I'm kind of in the mood to just work on a project I'm really excited about and finish it. I also think it's because I can't really wear anything I'm making. I usually don't dare. I've only put this on for the podcast, and as soon as the podcast is done, I will be back in something that's puppy safe. Right, next question. 3mm needles or 7mm needles forever? 100% 7mm needles. I actually really like knitting on 7mm needles. I think for me it creates, it's a perfect in between. I don't like fully chunky, but you still get good speed, you get good stitch definition. 7mm works with lots of different yarns, you know, so the sweater number 1 is 2 strands of mohair held double, and that works well in 7mm. You know, some of the yoke sweaters I've done from Lena Holm Samso is done on 7mm. There's just so many patterns, and I think it's a really sweet spot for moving fast. If I had to knit full projects on 3mm in my size, I don't think they'd ever get finished. I'm starting slowly but surely to learn to love the sort of 4.5mm range. So that's what this, for example, is knit on, and what Nordstrand will be made on. But I do find that still quite small. I don't get sore hands from knitting on 7mm needles either, so that's not a big concern for me. Next question, what's my favourite thing to knit? After discovering sort of lace knitting, I really do like knitting from charts, and then I love stockinette stitch in a round. I love the rhythmic just knitting without even looking. Because I've done so much ribbing at the moment, that's one of my least favourite things to knit. And another sort of part of that question is I also love knitting in non-mohair yarn that's easier to knit with. Have I ever tried crochet? No, I have actually never tried crochet. I think of my close friends, none of them are knitters nor crocheters, but both of my grannies knit. I think I assume that both of them, like, I know one of them just got asked by my cousin to crochet a cat or something, and she did it, but they're both primarily knitters, and so knitting was always what I was attracted to. I don't have anything against crochet. I just think Laura actually said it on one of her recent podcasts that it's can you tell I've just caught up with all of Laura's podcasts? That crochet is a very different art form, and the type of things you make with crochet often tends to be a bit of a different style and look than knitting. I'm not against ever trying crochet. Maybe one day I'll crochet a blanket or something like that, but no, I've never tried it. I only use crochet hooks to pick up dropped stitches, really. Next question, do you think you will always live in Scotland? I really don't know. This is also a question I ask myself all the time. I'm looking outside, it's about to absolutely start pouring it down. Sometimes I do wonder when I moved abroad why I did move abroad somewhere where it's nice and warm instead of moving to basically the exact same climate. I really don't know. I think it's hard because obviously slowly but surely Scotland is becoming my home, right? Like, I've lived here 7 years, and I think another question, so the next question is, what do I love about living in Scotland? And I actually find that really hard to answer, because I love living here because it's my home. You know, I was 19 when I moved to Scotland, and so I have lived all of my adult life here, and it's hard to imagine not living here. I think things that are making things arguments for staying here forever is obviously that it is my home, it's where I've settled down. My partner is Scottish, and I think he would find it hard to leave his friends and family behind. And that would also be what's hard about moving back to Denmark. I don't have a big network of friends in Denmark anymore. You know, my friends that were there before I moved, obviously, with time when I came home for shorter and shorter periods, and I spend most of my time just seeing family, so they kind of just, you know, you kind of just fall out of touch, I guess. And that would also be my concern if I ever did convince my partner to move to Denmark. It's, how do you settle back into a country like that? You know, Danes are known for being quite, once you're friends with a Dane, you're basically friends for life. But it can take time, and I think sometimes Danes can be a bit standoffish, and I find a lot of Danes, you know, they have friends they've known for many, many years, and they can be quite set in social circles. Obviously, having discovered knitting, at least I hope, I'm looking at, well, I hope Amelia is watching at least, that if I ever one day make it back to Denmark, that, you know, there would be people willing to meet with me for brunch or a cup of tea or whatever. But yeah, I do have that concern of like, how would I build a network again? But then it also breaks my heart thinking about that one day we could have children, and that my children might never feel Danish or feel connected to that part of their heritage, and also that my children might not be very close with my family because they wouldn't see them very much. I also think for career opportunities, Denmark might be better. I have a degree in psychology, and I would really like to be a psychologist, but it's really hard here in the UK. Equally, I really do like Scotland. I think I've become a bit, I think at the moment I have felt it even more because I've been so far away from my family, and that's been really hard. And I think I'm feeling it a lot because living where I live, I don't have any like really, you know, friends close by, and I think I'm in that phase of life where, you know, people from uni kind of has moved on, and yeah, feeling a little bit lonely. I think I feel kind of like there's something wrong with me for being lonely or feel like you're missing friends, but all I can say is I find it really hard to make friends now that I'm no longer at uni, and you no longer have those kind of things to tie you together. So yeah, the answer to do you think I'll always live here, I really don't know. I couldn't imagine us moving to England or moving to other parts of the UK. I think we have a dream of living in the middle of nowhere in the future. And for what I love about living here, that it's my home, and also that I've always really liked Scottish culture, like Scottish way of living, and the dog is digging again, so it's probably a sign that I should start wrapping up. But yeah, Scotland is really beautiful. That's nice. That was really nice being able to pull the dirt back in again. If you want a nice home, don't get a puppy. Yeah, I really do like sort of Scottish way of living. I think that suits me quite well. I love tea and cake and food and all of those things. So yeah, that's all the questions. I will now have to go wash my sofa because the puppy has left muddy paw prints all over it. I feel like she was more her true self today. What do you think, Fayla? Was it more? Oh, were you feeling more in a rascal mood? Anything you want to say? Oh, no, she just wants to say, Mummy, you have ignored me for way too long. But I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate any and all comments that you leave. I will do my best to get back to you, and I will see you next time. Bye.